Imagine you are a powerful, globally recognized leader. You have millions of followers,
Right.
and you're currently overseas, safely out of reach. But instead of staying there, you intentionally board a flight back to the United States for the explicit purpose of being locked up in a federal penitentiary.
It's completely counterintuitive.
Completely. You likely know the broad strokes of Reverend Sun Myung Moon's highly publicized imprisonment in the mid-1980s. But what often gets lost in the headlines is the psychological masterclass that was taking place behind the scenes.
Exactly.
So today we're looking at a fascinating stack of source material, specifically excerpts from his autobiography, The Danbury Mission, Faith and Freedom Behind Bars.
And the real value of this text, I mean, it's in its detailed breakdown of movement building under extreme duress.
Right.
Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the specific mechanics of his 13-month stint in Danbury Federal Prison. We are going to look at how this period didn't dismantle his following, but actually served as a vital catalyst, one that bridged massive political divides and birthed a totally new religious coalition.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the circumstances around his decision to actually enter the prison system, that gives us our first major aha moment.
It really sets the stage.
Yeah. At the time the U.S. government handed down this tax-related indictment against him, Reverend Moon was traveling internationally in Germany. And the text reveals a pretty startling reality about the prosecution's underlying goal.
Which was not what you'd expect.
Not at all. The authorities didn't actually want him in jail. They didn't want to manage his incarceration. Their primary objective was just to remove him from the country.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that makes total strategic sense from the establishment's perspective.
How so?
Well, the source material notes he was viewed as a massive thorn in the side of traditional churches. His theology was highly disruptive. It challenged all these established denominational boundaries, and his movement was attracting this huge, rapidly growing youth following in America.
Right, so he was a disruptor.
Exactly. The indictment was essentially a pressure valve. If he just chose to stay in Europe or, return to South Korea, the government gets exactly what it wants. They neutralize his influence in the U.S. without the messy spectacle of a trial and imprisonment.
So they put up a roadblock. And that presents a fascinating leadership dilemma. I mean, the logical self-preservation tactic is to just manage your global movement from a comfortable exile.
Sure, take the easy way out.
But he doesn't. He intentionally flies back to the U.S. to face the indictment and get locked up because he felt he had unfinished business.
Right, and he recognized the indictment for what it was, a deliberate roadblock meant to fracture his momentum. But his theological framework required a totally different response.
The Valley of Tears.
Yes. He introduces this concept of the Valley of Tears. It's the foundational architecture of his strategy.
It's fascinating.
He writes, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but he essentially says, if I am to get people who are in the Valley of Tears to repent, I must first shed tears. Unless I first experience such a wretched heart, I cannot get others to submit themselves to God.
It's a heavy concept.
It is. In his belief system, you can't lead from a distance, especially not when dealing with human suffering. So going to prison wasn't a legal defeat. It was a necessary credential.
You have to experience the wretchedness to lead people out of it.
Exactly. To lead people who are suffering, you have to voluntarily submit to it yourself.
But living out that philosophy in theory is one thing. Applying it to the daily reality of a federal prison is another entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings us to his actual routine inside Danbury, because it is a stark contrast to his life on the outside. Before this, he's a globally recognized figure, right? Used to leading thousands of devoted followers.
And then he walks into Danbury.
And he systematically strips all of that status away. He just focuses entirely on living for the sake of others.
The physical execution of this is really striking in the text. He committed to hard manual labor. He'd wake up earlier than the rest of the cell block just to clean the most unsanitary areas.
Right, the bathrooms, the floors.
Yeah. And when he was assigned tasks, like washing dishes or mopping, he approached them with this rigorous intensity, intentionally outworking everyone else, while also, constantly checking on the well-being of the other inmates.
And his physical posture is equally telling. He describes the prison cafeteria, which, if you can imagine, is just noise, exhaustion, institutional degradation.
A really harsh environment.
Very harsh. And while other inmates are slumping over their food or napping at the tables or just chatting to pass the time, Moon sits there with his back completely straight.
Just projecting this quiet dignity.
Yeah.
And that posture acts as a silent rebellion. A federal penitentiary is designed to strip you of your autonomy. By refusing to adopt that physical language of a defeated prisoner, he's communicating an unshakable self-respect. He drew a boundary the institution just could not cross.
And he became known as the guy who worked relentlessly without speaking. During his free time, he just meditated and read his Bible day and night.
What leads to the confrontation.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. This visible devotion provoked a direct challenge. Another prisoner sees him constantly reading the Bible and decides to test him.
It's a tense moment in the book.
Very. The inmate walks up to Moon, throws a copy of Hustler magazine, a pornographic magazine, right at him, and declares, "Here's my Bible. Take a look."
This is the ultimate stress test for that Valley of Tears philosophy we talked about.
Right, because what do you do in that split second?
It's a highly calculated provocation, designed to mock deeply held religious convictions using vulgarity. The strategic options are fraught with risk. If you react with hostility, you just reduce yourself to a common inmate in a petty dispute.
You lose the moral high ground.
Exactly. But conversely, if you act all morally superior, you risk alienating the exact population you believe you're there to serve.
So his response bypassed both of those predictable reactions.
What did he do?
He chose to absorb the indignity without breaking his pattern. He just continued his silent, rigorous labor. He kept cleaning, kept his straight posture in the cafeteria, kept reading his Bible.
Just unwavering consistency.
Unwavering. And the text notes he maintained this uncomplaining behavior for 3 solid months.
3 months. That highlights the sheer endurance required for this kind of barrier breaking. Silent consistency eventually wears down institutional cynicism.
It really does.
And the autobiography details a huge payoff. The social ice inside the prison finally fractured. After 3 months, Moon cultivated genuine friendships with the guards and with inmates from totally different walks of life, including a guy struggling with drug addiction.
And most remarkably, he actually won over the specific inmate who threw the Hustler magazine at him.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they became friends. After a few months of building these relationships, the dynamic shifted so profoundly that inmates started sharing their outside care packages with him.
That's a huge sign of respect in that environment.
Huge. And Moon uses this really evocative phrase to describe it. He writes, "Once we could share our hearts, it was as if spring had come to the inside of the prison."
Altering the emotional climate of a federal facility is a staggering psychological feat. He didn't just survive his sentence, he transformed his immediate environment by flat-out refusing to be a victim.
He turned a hostile population into a supportive community.
Meanwhile, though, outside the walls.
Right. While Moon is executing this strategy inside Danbury, his initial decision to face the indictment rather than flee is acting as a massive catalyst on the outside.
Because he forced their hand.
Exactly. By forcing the government to actually imprison a religious leader, he compelled the American religious establishment to pay attention. And word of his dignified conduct inside was leaking out, fueling this growing outrage.
Which sparked a mobilization that escalated into a massive movement.
It really did.
The scale of that external mobilization is where the historical significance really solidifies. We're talking about a coalition of 7,000 ministers and religious leaders.
7,000.
Yes, organizing publicly to accuse the United States government of violating fundamental religious freedoms.
And the composition of those 7,000 leaders is just staggering when you look at the political and theological divides they cross. This wasn't just his own followers protesting.
No, not at all.
The source text highlights these incredibly unlikely alliances. Specifically, it mentions conservative figures like Reverend Jerry Falwell of the Southern Baptist Convention as standing in direct coalition with liberal civil rights icons like Dr. Joseph E. Lowery, who, as you might know, later gave the benediction at President Obama's inauguration.
Okay, I actually need to pause our analysis right here just to address you, the listener, directly for a moment.
Good idea.
Because we are discussing several highly recognizable, highly politically charged figures right now. Prominent leaders from both the right wing and the left wing, alongside Reverend Moon himself.
Right.
It is crucial to state clearly that by mentioning these individuals and analyzing their actions, this deep dive is not taking any political sides. We're not endorsing the theological, social, or political viewpoints of Jerry Falwell, Joseph Lowery, or Sun Myung Moon.
Absolutely not.
Our objective is strictly and impartially to report on the historical events and the philosophical ideas exactly as they are presented in the original source material. We're just looking at the history.
That is a very important distinction to keep in mind. because our focus is entirely on the mechanics of how such disparate figures manage to align in the first place.
Exactly.
Seeing Falwell and Lowry leaders who resided on total opposite ends of the American political spectrum unite over a single cause requires a powerful unifying narrative.
You don't just get those two in a room together.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
And the emotional anchor that solidified this massive coalition of clergy was actually delivered by a 20-year-old woman, Reverend Moon's daughter, Injin.
Her address to that gathered clergy is a masterclass in rhetorical strategy, because religious freedom is an abstract, high-level political theory.
Right, it's very academic.
And abstractions rarely sustain massive movements on their own. But Jin's speech translated that lofty abstraction into a visceral, deeply human plea that resonated across every single denominational line in that room.
She stood before these 7,000 seasoned leaders, holding a letter she had composed for her father, and read it through tears. She grounded her speech in specific details. She recalled July 20th, 1984, the exact day her father entered Danbury. She described it as the day it felt like the end of the world had come to their family.
And she expressed this profound disbelief that something like this could happen in America.
Yes, a nation she noted her father had served and loved immensely.
Notice how strategic that is. She highlights his dedication to the country, directly countering the government's framing of him as some disruptive foreign entity.
Right, she flips the narrative.
She details his exhaustive work ethic, telling the crowd she almost never saw him sleep because he was up early praying and laboring for America. That narrative perfectly mirrors the behavior we just analyzed inside the prison.
And then she poses a question that demanded the clergy confront their own complacency. She asks, why does he have to go to Danbury?
A direct challenge to the room.
She acknowledged her father wasn't focused on his own suffering. His life had been full of hardship. But she brought the focus sharply back to his humanity, reminding this massive audience that he was a 64-year-old man.
Just a stark visual for the room.
Contrasting his deep love for America with the reality that at that very moment, he was likely washing dishes or mopping floors in a prison cafeteria.
But the real turning point of her speech is when she recounts visiting him in prison the week prior.
Right, seeing him in the uniform.
Seeing him in his prison uniform caused her to break down in tears. But she doesn't use that moment to elicit pity from the clergy. She reveals the instruction her father gave her during that visit.
Which was not a request for comfort.
Not at all. It was a mandate for action.
He instructed his daughter not to cry for him, but to pray for America. He urged her to channel her sorrow and anger into a constructive force aimed at ensuring the country remained truly free.
He was prepared to bear the cross of his imprisonment.
Yes. And she concluded her address to the crowd with a defining statement. Quote, "Freedom of religion is the basis of all freedoms."
And that single sentence operated as the keystone for the entire movement.
It really did.
It provided the shared framework that allowed a conservative Southern Baptist and a liberal civil rights leader to stand on the same stage.
Because it made it universal.
Exactly. The brilliant rhetorical pivot of her speech was making the clergy realize that Moon's imprisonment wasn't an isolated incident about a fringe theology. It was a stress test of the First Amendment.
If the state could target one minority religious leader, then the foundational protections for every denomination in that room were suddenly vulnerable.
So the pressure generated by this broad coalition, combined with Moon's conduct inside, eventually brought his time in Danbury to a close.
Right. He didn't serve his full sentence. Due to his exemplary behavior, which perfectly aligns with the accounts of his relentless cleaning and quiet dignity, his sentence was reduced by 6 months.
Meaning he served 13 months total.
Yes, after 13 months he was released, and the environment he walked out into was vastly different from the one he had left.
The shift in the power dynamic is remarkable. Think about it. 13 months earlier, he's treated as a disruptive foreign influence being forced into a cell.
Right.
Upon his release, there is a massive banquet held in Washington, D.C., where he is welcomed by an organized, unified front of 1,700 Christian ministers and Jewish rabbis.
The roadblock was effectively transformed into a national platform.
And his address at this banquet reflects a leader who is no longer playing defense.
Oh, not at all. The text describes him speaking in a loud, uninhibited voice to the world at large. He showed zero concern for the reactions of his political or theological opponents.
He had the floor, and he used it.
He used it to firmly reiterate his core philosophy of transcending religious boundaries. He delivered a quote that strikes right at the heart of the gathering. He said, "God is not a denominationalist. He is not bound by secondary arguments over doctrine."
That is an incredibly audacious statement to deliver to a banquet hall filled with 1,700 denominational leaders.
I mean, talk about knowing your audience and still telling them the hard truth.
Exactly. These are ministers and rabbis whose entire livelihoods and identities are constructed around specific theological doctrines. And by labeling those doctrines as secondary arguments, he's directly challenging their institutional structures, insisting that the divine perspective operates entirely outside those walls.
And he expanded on that premise immediately, adding, "There are no distinctions over nationality or race in God's great parental heart. Neither are there any walls between nations or cultures there."
Framing God's nature as a parental heart was brilliant. It allowed him to bypass complex theological debates and appeal directly to a universal human concept.
Everyone understands the heart of a parent.
Yes, he was arguing that the divisions tearing society apart were artificial constructs. They had no basis in the divine reality he was pointing toward.
And with the attention of these leaders totally secured, he pivoted to delivering a sweeping diagnosis of the sicknesses plaguing the United States.
He laid out a stark list.
Very stark. Severe racial divisions, a profound confusion of values, overarching moral degradation, spiritual drought, the rapid decline of the Christian faith, and the looming threat of atheistic communism.
He was no longer speaking as a marginalized outsider begging for fair treatment. He was adopting the posture of a cultural prophet.
Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like.
He framed his own unjust imprisonment not as the core issue, but as a mere symptom of a much deeper moral decay infecting the entire nation. He asserted that addressing these massive societal fractures was the exact reason he had answered a divine call to come to America in the first place.
To combat this decay, he explicitly called for a new reformation and a great Christian awakening. He challenged the clergy in the room to radically re-examine their roles and to repent.
And he drew a direct historical parallel.
He did. He compared the cultural climate of the 1980s to the era of Jesus 2,000 years prior, stating that the urgent need for foundational repentance was repeating itself, warning that revitalizing the country's morality was the only viable path forward.
This rhetoric was deeply provocative. But the source text demonstrates it wasn't just a fleeting moment of inspiration that vanished after dinner.
No, it led to real action.
The relationships forged during his imprisonment and this subsequent mobilization resulted in tangible institutional change. Moon viewed the entire ordeal as a manifestation of a higher will, and the aftermath proved his methodology yielded concrete results.
The ripple effect of this period is really the final piece of the puzzle here. The religious leaders who fiercely advocated for his release didn't just return to their respective congregations and forget about it.
They were profoundly curious about the mechanics of his movement.
Yes. The text notes that these ministers began taking turns flying to South Korea. They went there to deeply study his work and understand the specific spiritual gravity that was drawing so many American youth to his cause.
That level of ongoing engagement demonstrates the lasting power of the respect he earned. I mean, they crossed international borders to study the theology of a man the U.S. government had just tried to silence.
It's an incredible turnaround.
And when these leaders returned to the United States, they took decisive action. 120 of those ministers collaborated to establish an entirely new interfaith organization, the American Clergy Leadership Conference, or the ACLC.
It is a staggering trajectory to map out. We're looking at a timeline that begins with a man intentionally flying back to the U.S. to mop the floors of a federal penitentiary.
Enduring vulgar provocations with silent dignity.
Right. And it ends with the launch of an international interfaith clerical coalition that bridged some of the deepest political divides in the country.
It comprehensively validates the strategy of the Valley of Tears. The establishment attempted to place an insurmountable roadblock in his path. But by willingly entering that wretchedness and maintaining his core principles, that roadblock was dismantled and reassembled into a powerful launchpad for his broader mission.
Which brings us entirely back to you, listening right now. While the scale of this historical event involves thousands of clergy and international movements, the core of the source text reveals a highly accessible truth about the staggering power of quiet dignity.
It really does scale down to the individual.
It does. Consider the roadblocks you encounter in your own life. When you are confronted with a profoundly unjust situation in your career, within your community, or in your personal relationships, the instinct is usually to retreat or to react with matching hostility.
Right. The feeling of being marginalized or willfully misunderstood is a universal human experience.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of this story provide a blueprint for navigating those exact moments.
Because refusing to adopt the posture of a victim is an active strategic choice. Whether that looks like taking on the unglamorous work no one else wants to do, maintaining your composure in a chaotic environment, or choosing a path of silent consistency when a critic throws a metaphorical or literal insult in your face.
Those choices matter.
They do. Those small, localized choices to uphold your dignity can fundamentally alter the emotional climate around you. It transforms personal indignity into a force that eventually compels respect and draws even your harshest critics to your side.
As we synthesize the broader implications of this text today, it raises a vital, lingering question regarding human nature for you to mull over.
I love a good lingering question.
Well, we witnessed something historically extraordinary in this deep dive. Incredibly diverse and fundamentally opposed groups. Conservative Southern Baptists, liberal civil rights leaders, and Jewish rabbis uniting across deep ideological chasms.
Right, rallying together over a shared, perceived injustice regarding the imprisonment of one man.
A truly boundary-breaking display of unity. But it leads us to ask, does true unity across vastly different belief systems actually require a shared external hardship to survive?
That is the question, isn't it?
We saw this profound coalition form under the intense pressure of perceived government overreach. But is it possible for us as a society to sustain that kind of barrier-breaking unity in times of absolute peace? Or do we fundamentally require a crisis to remind us that, as Moon argued to that room of dominational leaders, there are no walls in the parental heart?
That is a phenomenal, challenging thought to carry with you the next time you examine the ideological divides in our society today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We thrive on taking these rigorous journeys through history and human psychology with you, extracting the most vital insights from the source material so you can navigate the world a bit more clearly. Keep that new perspective actively buzzing in your mind, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.